webinar on the AgGateway's Grain Council and a proposed project, and then some of the supporting resources for the project. I'm AgGateway Standards Director, and I have with me Marilyn Hunter, also on the AgGateway staff, and then Randy Sunderman with Heartland, and Pam Rincker with SSI, and they're both leaders within the Grain Council. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pam for some remarks about the project and the council.
Thank you, Jim. As many of you on this call may already know, the Grain Council has organized a pilot project task force to recommend an e-business message to be conducted by our council. This task force met last month and selected the commodity movement message from the library of messages available to us from the AgXML group. The Grain Pilot Task Force will actually be presenting a charter very soon to the entire Grain Council for their review, and we will be discussing that charter and potentially voting on this at our next meeting, which will be our annual meeting in Phoenix next month. The project has an acronym nickname. It is called CART, C-A-R-T, which stands for Commodity Automation for Rail and Truck. And so as a background on AgXML, Jim Wilson is here today to educate our council and any other interested parties that we have on the webinar about the AgXML group, its history, and its message library. So, Jim, I'm going to kick it back over to you.
Okay, thanks, Pam. Just a quick note, in your GoToWebinar control panel, there should be a facility there for you to submit questions. I would encourage you to submit questions. Marilyn Hunter will be monitoring that questions window, and she'll either interrupt me to ask some questions, or she'll wait till the end of the presentation and cover some other questions. So again, feel free to submit any questions you have. Okay, so I'm going to give you an overview of AgXML. So AgXML is both an organization and a set of standards that the organization produced. And I've given this presentation a number of times over the past year and a half or so. This is probably my 6th time. And I've really pared it down for this session. And so again, you know, given that I'll be brief in many areas that in the past I've elaborated, please don't hesitate to ask some questions and ask me to elaborate. Okay, so in this session we're going to talk about the mission of AgXML. We're going to skip a couple other slides on goals and approach taken, things like that. We're going to briefly talk about the past, present, and the future. I think it's important to understand where AgXML has been and why this project proposal really represents the future of the organization, and it fits right in with the plans. Then we're going to cover website and downloads, and then finally we'll dig into some of those downloads by covering the AgXML standards and guidelines. So first, the mission. So this is the mission. Pretty much as it was written in 2000, and it was modified slightly, I don't know, about 5 or 6 years ago to add renewable fuel in the equation. But the mission, as you can read there, is AgXML is an organization of grain and processing companies and related entities committed to identify, develop, and implement standards and guidelines intended to bring electronic business efficiencies to grain, oilseed, and renewable fuel companies. So some of you may be familiar with AgGateway's mission, which is to promote, enable, and expand e-business in agriculture. And I think you'd agree that this mission is sort of a specialization of that mission and is very aligned with it. Okay, so AgXML has when it was formed, developed some goals, developed a set of guidelines that govern its development approach, and those things are all on both the website and in one of the documents that I'll show you later. But we'll skip these in terms of the slides. I think this slide is really important, you know, to help bridge some of the history that we'll discuss in a moment. And that is AgXML, from the time it was formed through today even, has always been a lean, no-frills operation. In other words, it took a rifle shot focus on standards development at hand. There were no membership campaigns. There was no marketing and communications committee. There were no projects to implement facilitation. It was just focus on standards and leave all those other things to, you know, to other companies or activities in the industry. And you know, despite that you know, laser focus on standards development, we do have, you know, the organization did achieve great success in gaining traction throughout the industry, not only in North America, but in other regions of the world, you know, Australia, South America, Europe, and other places. So it's a good set of standards. And with that, let's transition to look at the past, present, and future of AgXML. So AgXML was formed in October 2000 as AgXML LLC, and at that time I was privileged to be asked to serve as the executive director, and that's a role that I maintain today, although my activities are sort of limited to things like this, and we anticipate perhaps even phasing the organization out in the future. In November 2001, after 12 months or 13 months of very intense activity, weeks and weeks of face-to-face meetings, we released AgXML version 1. Then 3 years later, we developed rail rate quote standards in collaboration with the rail industry, with BNSF, CN, UP, other you know, other stakeholders for that data. And then the resulting standards were subsequently submitted to ANSI ASC X12, or for many of you, those would be the folks that maintain the EDI standards. So they were getting into XML by that point, and they now own those standards. Then in 2006, we all got together and hashed out XML schema for settlements. Then in 2007, after several months of collaborating with USDA's GIPSA group, we released USDA endorsed quality certificates standard update. So by 2007, well, actually in AgXML version 1, we had a schema for quality certificate, singular, and then through collaborating with the USDA, we added a few fields, and then also added a new message that supported batching and released quality certificates, plural, for that. And then at that time, the USDA issued a directive to the ag industry stating that they welcomed submissions of quality certificate-related reports in that standard format. Then in 2009, AgXML released version 4, which is the current or latest version, and that added support for biofuel requirements. And then finally, in 2012, AgGateway established a grain council, and that was in coordination with AgXML deciding to stand down operations and transition them to AgGateway's grain council. And so, you know, here we are today, you know, in October 2014, eager to launch a project that leverages these standards. And I mentioned earlier that you know, that there was a bridge between the approach taken with AgXML and today, and that is that AgXML in the past had a laser focus on developing standards, where AgGateway has to focus on implementation, leveraging standards where applicable. And so this is in my view, a very healthy transition. And so AgGateway can help facilitate projects, and we can leverage the standards that AgXML produced. Okay, so the present and the future. The present and future of the grain industry standards development and coordinated implementation project is with AgGateway's Grain Council. While AgXML standards implementation is widespread, AgGateway's communications and implementation project management resources will enable the grain industry to achieve greater levels of efficiency enabled by electronic business. All right, and that's a statement you can find on the AgXML website. Okay, so the next section here is on website and downloads. The website is simply agxml.org, and there's a certain experience you would have if you are unauthenticated. In other words, you're not logged in. And then we'll look at that. We'll do a quick tour and then look at the downloads page. So I'm going to switch gears here. Fire up a browser. Enjoy the Dilbert cartoon while it loads. Okay, so in this case, I'm just an anonymous user. I'll blow this up a little bit. No, not that big. There we go. And it's a pretty simple website. So we have home, standards, membership, and then about. We have mission, history and future, and contact. And contact just points to my contact information. The history and future is exactly what I just covered. Actually, there's more narrative around it. So it's very current and up to date. If you need to, explain AgGateway's history and future as background to, supporting why your company might participate in this project, that's a very good resource for that. And then there's information about the mission and operating principles. Some of those things that I indicated we'd skip. So I won't go to those pages. Membership, there's a page that lists the AgXML members, and then there's membership application. And this is important for reasons I'll explain in just a moment. So if we go to the standards page, first of all, you'll note here that there's a big note at the top, and it says you must be logged in to download AgXML standards. For those who haven't registered, registration is free, and once verified, you will be able to log in. For non-members, membership is free. See the membership application page for details. So the root of all this is that the AgXML management team, that's sort of LLC speak for board of directors, the AgXML board, if you will, said, you know what, we're very proud of the work we did, and we're very concerned that somebody may take these standards and abuse them, implement them in ways that we didn't intend, which would basically be depart from what the standard says. And so as a way to encourage adherence to the standard, the management team said, you know what, let's just make people sign the AgXML operating agreement in addition to just agreeing to the license agreement, and become members to access the standards. And we'll make membership free because we don't need dues. We're not continuing operations. We have a little money in the bank, and they cover certain periodic maintenance items, but we don't need dues. And so that was the plan. This may change over the next year. I suspect it will, actually. But that's the way it is now. So you can see here we have login and we have register. And so I'm going to switch gears, just switch to another browser where I'm already logged in. And we'll add up a little bit, and we'll go to the standards page. Okay, and you can see here, since I'm logged in, I don't get that big note because it's irrelevant. And let me start at the bottom and scroll up. And so you can see here this timeline of where we've been. So there's version 1 here. It was released November 2001, and it included bill of lading, commodity movement, and we'll cover these messages here in a minute. And there's download link. There's version 2. And then you'll notice here there's version 3, which is just quality cert. and this is a little special case because the USDA, is part of their condition for supporting the AgXML standard, they said, you know, this thing needs to be freely downloadable, whether somebody's logged in or not, whether they're a member or not. And so we're like, okay, that's reasonable. And so we sort of broke those out for that download. And then there's a similar thing for version 4. There's a version 4 all, which means everything in the AgXML standards. And then there's a version 4 just the quality cert. And so the quality cert is, again, to satisfy that USDA requirement. And so if I click on this download for version 4 all, we get a nice screen with the AgXML license agreement that basically says, you know, I promise not to, you know, abuse the standard. And then you click on the big green button that say you agree to abide by it, and then you get the list of standards. Okay? And again, the messages we have here, and we'll cover them in a slide here in a moment, again, and compare them with AgE standards. We have bill of lading, commodity movement, contracts, contract pricing, quality certs, quality certificate, singular, quality certificates, plural, the batch version of the former, and then settlement and weight certificate. And then there's downloads for the schemas, external code lists, a standards browser, and then documentation. And I want to make a note here. You'll see this later when I share it with you. The documentation is version 1 documentation, but much of it, I guess perhaps all of it, still applies to version 4, which of course raises the question, well, you added a couple new messages between version 1 and version 4. For example, settlement. And yes, that's true. And the team at the time said, you know what, it's, you know, in terms of bang for the buck, it's really not worth it for us to try to document it. And part of that reason was that our development process was to define our processes, and in our process definitions, identify where data flowed between parties. And then once we did that, we said, okay, now now that we've provided process context for the data flow, the message flow, what do the messages look like? And it turns out that settlement is such an iterative and such a internally people-driven process that we couldn't effectively document the process. So we just said, okay, well, in this case, we're going to suspend our approach, and we're just going to dive right into the message, as much as it might not, feel right in terms of our processes. And we documented the message, and it turned out that worked out well, but we ended up not having documentation around it. So anyway, that's where we are with it. And with that, let me pause while I'm shifting back to the presentation. Marilyn, are there any questions so far?
No, I have not received any.
Okay. Okay, and if you joined late, again, in your control panel, there's a spot for questions, so feel free to submit questions if you have any. Okay, so let's switch gears and go back to the presentation here. And one question that comes up occasionally is, well, what's the difference between AgXML standards and AgGateway standards, which are also referred to as AgE standards? And just to keep things simple, we also added another way to refer to them as AgGateway open standards in response to certain criticisms that we weren't open, but we are, and so we added that qualifier on there. And you may also hear them referred to as TIMI standards, SiteX standards, ChemXML. They are all exactly the same thing. They are all AgE standards. So starting at the top there, you'll notice that we have both contract in AgXML and in AgE standards. And the AgE standards contract originated a few years ago in the context of the Crop Nutrient 1 project, and they facilitated that project. And that group was aware of the existence of the AgXML standard, and they actually asked me to attend the meeting and walk them through that as a way of sort of thinking through whether that standard, the AgXML contract standard, might work for crop nutrient. and it was clear very early on that the AgXML contract, which was developed to focus on grain commodities, was not a very good fit at all for crop nutrient products. And so then the question arose, well, could it be modified to be a good fit? And the group concluded, and I concurred with their conclusion, that it probably made more sense just to create something from scratch that fit the crop nutrient needs. And so that's what they did. But then you can see beyond that, there really isn't any overlap. Within Aggie standards, there's a whole bunch of supply chain kinds of things like order create, order response, order, cancel, things like that, or order change, I'm sorry. And then there's invoice, ship notice, product movement, which is an ag-specific kind of a message, inventory actual usage, there's some new seed-related messages, and then lots and lots of other Aggie standards messages. Within AgXML, we have contract pricing, quality cert, weight cert, commodity movement, settlement, and then there's bill of lading, which, bill of lading is kind of supply chain oriented, and from what I hear, it's not very widely implemented, if at all. So it just kind of ends up getting forgotten. So anyway, those are, that's the relationship between AgXML and Aggie standards, and there's a note down here that, there's other stuff such as OAGIS, the schema we use for AGIS, there's in field operations space, there's ISO 11783, parts 10 and 11 actually, and those standards are quite relevant, but they do not, I assure you, overlap with anything in AgXML. Well, at least the ISO 11783. There is overlap between OAGIS and both Aggie standards and AgXML, but that's a subject for another presentation. Okay, so let's actually again switch gears and look at the documentation. So we'll look at the documentation, we'll look at the schemas, we'll look at some of the supporting other supporting resources, and starting with the documentation. It is an enormous document. It's 805 pages, and I'm sure you all are quite impressed, but I have to confess that a whole bunch of those pages are sort of auto-generated schema documentation. But with that, there is a Start Here section, and I would encourage you to use that section, Start Here. And there's a section here that suggests if you're this kind of a person, business executive, IT executive, or developer, read certain things, skim them, or just sort of take a look and just kind of be aware that they are there and available. Let's see here, intended audiences. Oh, okay. So moving on to the executive overview here. This covers a lot of the information that we skipped in the presentation and that is available on the website, and we skipped it there too. So if you're interested, you can dive into that. You can see a list of members and contributors in the initial publication. It's kind of interesting, I guess. You can see here rooster.com, which no longer exists. So that may give some of you flashbacks. And then this is where I think things really, hit home for a lot of people. We have the version 1 accomplishments, okay? So the AgXML participants have developed an industry glossary and accomplished the following. So this industry glossary, our glossary that we developed in AgXML is really, really good, I have to say. We had a lady named Courtney Spooner from ADM, and she was designated and called the glossary czar. And she was very careful to capture all the important points about implementing various aspects of the messages, and she did a fantastic job. So anyway, be aware there's a very good glossary backing this stuff up. And so here you see the version 1 documents listed here, and then you can see the use cases that were developed, basic process diagrams, whether a schema was developed, test scenario, test instance documents, and whether there was some self developed. So if we walk through for contract, the use cases we did for contract were brokered and non-brokered. and then we created process diagrams for brokered and non-brokered. Of course, we created the schema. That's true for all of them. And then we did test scenarios, and we actually developed test scenarios for all of them, for rail corn basis and structured beans DP, and we created test instance documents. So for some of you, this might be really helpful because this is like real world data, like we really scanned in contracts and well, actually I don't know about contracts. I think so. Scanned in contracts and quality certs, weight certs, then took the data that was scanned in, and by scanned in I mean like took the real documents and scanned them to PDF kind of thing, and then created instance documents. So basically created AgXML compliant quality certificates based on the scanned in images of these real world documents. So if you want to, you can sort of explore that and see how they map. And then the XSLT is just a transformation from XML to something that kind of looks pretty in a browser, or that's what we thought in 2001. I'm sure it looked pretty crude by today's browser standards. And so anyway, you can explore this whole table here. Moving on to the commodity contract scope, and this might, this applies more or less to other documents, notably commodity movement, which I know is in scope for a contemplated project. The business documents, we said in scope or commodity contract pricing storage contract. Out of scope was contract amendments, freight, orders to futures houses, and orders to clearinghouses. Commodities in scope were grain and oilseeds. Commodities out of scope were rice, bags, containers, packaging, processed goods, meals, and oils. I've heard rumors that rice worked just fine. I don't know if that's confirmed or not. So if you're in it for rice, you might just double check and make sure things work well for rice. The geography or language, or perhaps a more modern way to put it, is the geopolitical context and scope was the United States, exporting from the United States, and then American English language, and then out of scope was anything other than that. And then the functionality, the in-scope functionality was to support USDA standards, NGFA standards, multiple details for prices, multiple details for commodities, for items, shipment locations, delivery locations, futures, priced, basis priced, flat established priced, unpriced, and no basis established or futures. And then out of scope was anything dealing with exchange rates. And then you can see there's another table for commodity shipments, and I'll leave that to you guys to check out. And believe it or not, 13 years later, I still have the same phone number. So there we go. So that's the executive overview. Let's jump down to the standards. So within our standards, and you probably caught this when I went through those tables, we have written use cases. We have process diagrams or AgXML activity diagrams. We have a glossary, schemas, which at the time people were, careful to use the appropriate plural, which was schemata, but no one uses that nowadays. And then XML schema documentation, test cases, instance documents, XSLT, and so on. And with that, let's jump down to, and you can see on the left here, it's probably difficult to read, but there's a nice table of contents on the left here. So if we jump down to commodity contract, you can see here we have a use case, and for those of you that have participated in projects that Marilyn and I have facilitated, this form should look familiar to you. This is a formal use case, and primary actors, stakeholders, and interests, scenario, all that good stuff. So we have a brokered or a non-brokered contract here. We have a UML activity diagram for a non-brokered contract, complete with the swim lanes and object flow here with the state indicated. So this is all hopefully good stuff. Cases where there are parallel operations, which actually the UML activity diagram expresses really well. And then here's a broker contract. So anyway, you're not in this presentation supposed to sort of digest all this, but just be aware that it's in the documentation. Okay, and then with that, just sort of a fun fact. Well, actually, before I get to that, let me show you a couple of test cases. So here's the Railcorn basis test case. And you can see this one is, there's a train of 25 cars, and we just pull out 9 cars. And the test case includes the batch weight cert, individual cars weight cert, individual cars quality cert, commodity movement pre-advised, bill of lading, sale contract confirmation, and sale pricing confirmation. Okay, and we get into this, and here's a real batch weight cert from Cargill. And just all sorts of stuff here. And we're saying here, hey, just use these last 9 cars. Here's a quality cert information. And again, just use the last 9 cars. Here's the pre-advised, and it goes on and on. And then and here's some stuff for ADM. So anyway, this is we think this is good stuff to help you in your implementation. And we'll look at the associated XML documents, or we'll just folder them here in a few minutes. And then finally on to my fun fact here, or I think it's fun anyway. So we have Marilyn on the call, who's in charge of questions, and Marilyn and I have been at this stuff for a long time, and Marilyn was an important part of this effort back when she was working with Rapid, and she offered some good advice to the fledgling organization in our efforts. So anyway, and you also see, undoubtedly many of you recognize Ron Farrell's name here as well.
Jim,
okay.
I was
yes.
going to say, I don't know whether it's the internet connectivity, but some of the slides and where you're at is not, we just now got to acknowledgments, so I didn't know. I just want you to be aware that your connectivity or mine, one of the two, is a bit slower than what you're talking.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I could see that. I took a step out of the ADAPT model development meeting, with the Precision Ag Council. I'm sitting in my car in the parking lot outside the Courtyard Marriott, so the connectivity may not be all that great. But anyway, okay, I'll keep that in mind. Okay, so anyway, let me shift gears again. So that's the written documentation about it. And again, that all is downloadable here on the AgXML version 4 downloads page. Now, if we switch and look at the schema itself, all of the AgXML standard from a schema perspective is contained within a single file. We have tools to extract pieces of it, like if you just want commodity movement, for example, have a tool that will prune out all the non-commodity movement related stuff. And so if we look at commodity movement, I'm going to switch to a graphical representation of that, and see if I can fit some of these windows here. Okay. Okay, so within commodity movement, well, there's a lot of stuff in here, as you can see. So action type, the usual stuff like create, date, time, last update, date, and things like that. Movement type, movement status, movement buyer, movement seller, transportation mode, and it goes on and on. it's important here that there's the shipment information, quantity information, and then there's the commodity movement, weight information, and quality information. So commodity movement as a message is, and this is where I really invite Pam to interject if I get any of this wrong. We kind of thought of it as a kind of an envelope, kind of a grab bag of stuff that needs to be sent together from one party to another. And it was interesting, I do recall, bits of the conversation around what we should name the message, because there wasn't any obvious name because the message hadn't really existed before. This concept, there was no analog in the real world of commodity movement. It was just, hey, if you FedEx a bunch of stuff somewhere, or fax a bunch of stuff somewhere, and there wasn't a particular name for it. And so commodity movement was the name that the team came up with. And again, it is to combine all these things together. So the weight certs, the quality certs, the commodity information, shipment information, things like that. So, Pam, is there anything you want to add to that in terms of the
no, I don't think so at this time. We will be going into this in more detail at the annual meeting.
Okay, good. Yeah, so anyway, this is the message, and you can drill down on it. You can see the see code lists and things like that in the message. And then let's take a look at, I mentioned that that there were support files, and again, that's something you can download there. And you can see there are, well, you can see a screen full here, and it's about a screenful and a half here. And you can see there's lots of files that are XML documents, and so these are the sample documents. So you saw earlier those scanned in images, and so these are the files that represent, or that represent the data in the scanned in images. So we can take a look at one of them here. So this is one of the rail cars from ADM/Growmark, and it has the quality certificate information in it. Okay, so just be aware that that all that exists. And then let's take a look at the code list. So if you download the external code list, the code lists are maintained in both, in the current version of Excel and in the older version of Excel. And then also there's an XSD expression of them. So if you choose to, you can change the type in the XSD document to make them a server validation purpose. And if you don't know what that means, don't worry. That's kind of a techie sort of thing to do. But I just know that you can bake it in there. So anyway, we have these lists of values. So for example, commodity codes, and you can see here that there are several of them that are related to biofuels, so biodiesel, and so on. And some of these lists are quite short. Some of them are kind of long. This one has 83 items in it. So we have commodity code, commodity group, commodity class. And don't ask me to explain the distinguishing characteristics between them, because I actually don't know. There's quality factor names, so these are the kinds of things that might appear in a quality cert. There's quality factor code, commodity subclass, commodity name, and well, there aren't that many more. I'll just go through them all. Commodity code, commodity name, futures commodity name, and then finally futures commodity code. So all these code lists exist, and so for some of you that are experienced with e-business implementation, you may, and XML schemas, you may be thinking, well, why are these in Excel rather than baked into the XML schema, because XML schemas support lists like this. And the reason they're separate is that the group recognized that some of these things may change over time, and we wanted to decouple the maintenance of the code list from the schema maintenance. And so that's why earlier I showed you that there's a whole bunch of these XSD files here. So if we open one of these up, and we'll look at the text view of it, you'll see that it's a really simple schema. All it has is a simple type, commodity class, and then it has all these enumeration values. So if you want to, you can, again, you can have one of your tech guys kind of tweak the schema and sort of activate this, if you will, to perform some validation. But if this list needs to change in the future, we can do that without having to update the schema overall. Okay, so I think we are near the end, if not the end. So yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, so that covers an AgXML overview. Again, we really glossed over a lot of stuff. But Marilyn, do we have any questions to cover?
I have not received any on my end. Jim, you might want to check to see if you have any, in case that went just to the organizer.
Oh, okay. No, I think I'm good. Okay, I'm sorry, Pam or Randy, or do you have any questions, or is there anything I should cover in any greater depth?
I can't think of anything, Jim.
No, I think I'm good as well. Thank you.
Okay, good. All right. Well, with that, we'll wrap up the meeting. And again, we really appreciate you joining this session. We have recorded it and plan on posting it. And we really look forward to you all plugging into the project and when we get that going. So anyway, thank you, everybody.